A Link to the Past, arguably one of the most important games of all time. To be completely candid, I'm somewhat scared to even review this game, not because I'm worried I won't like it or because I'm worried about some sort of potential backlash, but because it just feels like a Herculean task. As I literally just said, this is one of the most important games of all time, and I've reviewed some more maybe considered gaming royalty in the past, but this game feels like it's in a league all of its own. The influence of this game can not only be felt in every subsequent Zelda, but also in 90% of adventure games to come after it. The power of this game cannot be understated, and having played this game for the first time a year or two ago, and only replaying it for a second time for this very review, I got to experience that power firsthand without any nostalgia. But enough exposition, let me show you why this game is arguably one of the greatest in history.
Much like the last two games, if you wait around on the title screen for a bit, you're treated to some backstory to the plot going forward. The prologue tells of a great power known as the Triforce, which resides in a hidden land called the Sacred Realm. Many people sought to enter this realm to find the Triforce and gain the power it holds. However, none returned, and eventually evil energy began to expel from the Golden Land. This was apparently a product of Ganon gaining access to the land, wishing upon the Triforce, and then unleashing an attack on Hyrule. As a result, a great war broke out known as the Imprisoning War, in which many of Hyrule's soldiers died, but they did not die in vain, as the King of Hyrule enlisted the help of 7 sages, who sealed off the Golden Land, and Ganon along with it. This led to a time of peace in Hyrule, but eventually cracks started to show, and Hyrule suffered many natural calamities, which led to a strange wizard named Aghanim appearing and offering to help the king fix the issues going on in Hyrule. This was of course a front. Eventually Aghanim hatched a plan to take out the king and kidnap the 7 maidens, who were descendants of the sages mentioned earlier, hoping to use their powers to break the seal to the Sacred Realm. This leads into the game itself, which opens with Zelda, who happens to be one of the maidens herself, telepathically communicating with Link, asking for his help. But just as Zelda tells you this, your uncle tells you to stay home, as he plans to venture to Hyrule Castle and save the princess himself. You of course don't listen and go running after him, avoiding armed guards on the way. You eventually catch up to your uncle and find him mortally wounded, but he's thinking of the princess even in his hour of need, and entrusts you with his sword and shield, asking you to go save her.
Can we briefly talk about how badass this segment is? I mean seriously, I don't think this sequence of events gets enough love because for standards of the time, it's absolutely epic. You're woken from your slumber by the cries of Princess Zelda, and before you have any time to process any of it, your uncle runs off leaving your home alone because he wants to go save her himself. You then venture out after him, risking certain death, ducking and dodging armed guards on the way, only to find him on the edge of death, before taking his sword and shield to almost pick up where he left off, learning to fight on the fly and taking out guards that would have killed you mere seconds ago. It's a really intense opening for a Nintendo game of all things, and despite only being a short opening section, it adds so much grandiosity to the mix before the adventure even truly starts.
Gushing aside, after taking out a few guards, you eventually find the princess and rescue her, taking her through the castle's sewer system to a sanctuary. There Link meets a sage, who tells him if he wishes to defeat Aghanim, he'll require the aid of the Master Sword, also letting him know that an elder called Sahasrahla should know more about the legendary weapon. Upon meeting the elder, Link learns that to be able to wield the Sword of Evil's Bane in the first place, he must prove himself by gathering 3 pendants of virtue. So he set off to do just that, finding the pendants in 3 different dungeons. Speaking of which, the dungeons found in this game are so much better than the ones found in the past 2 games. While I enjoyed the ones in the first game, they weren't very visually striking and were at times confusing to navigate, and the ones in Adventure of Link were oftentimes unfair with enemy placement, on top of being equally confusing to navigate. But the ones in A Link to the Past are great. While they do still suffer from the occasional bit of shitty enemy placement or the odd conveniently placed bottomless pit, it's made up for tenfold with the distinctive layouts and themes found throughout every dungeon, as well as the fact they're fun as all hell to explore. I mean seriously, even though I've played through this game before, I was looking forward to every dungeon, excited to see what fun puzzles were waiting for me. Oh yeah, that's right, this game is arguably the first first to introduce real puzzles to the franchise. That's not to say Zelda 1 and 2 didn't have any puzzles, but here they feel like an actual puzzle you have to solve using your brain, rather than bombing some random wall to progress. The puzzles can be a little weird and can take some serious thought, but it's nothing you can't figure out with a bit of critical thinking. And not only are the dungeons made great thanks to the distinct designs and puzzles, but also because of Link's new and improved arsenal. Bombs, arrows, the canes, the magic hammer, the goddamn hookshot. There are so many great weapons that either returned or were introduced in this game that went on to be some of the most iconic staples in the franchise, and for good reason. The equipment and items at Link's disposal truly make him a force to be reckoned with, and make the game super enjoyable with how the items and equipment interact with the world and can be used in multiple ways. And if that wasn't enough, Link's general mobility in the overworld has been improved, with him being able to lift stuff now, as well as his ability to fight seeing its own improvement, with plenty of new sword techniques like the spin attack. Anyway, enough gushing. Once he finds all 3 pendants, Link enters the Lost Woods, and we're treated to one of the most iconic scenes in all of gaming, as he pulls a Master Sword out of its pedestal. However, shortly after acquiring the blade, Link gets another telepathic message from Zelda, this time requesting his help, as the guards have broken into the sanctuary. Link scurries over to help Zelda, but is met by the sage, who informs him that it's too late and that the princess has been captured once more. Making haste, he arrives at Hyrule Castle where she's being held captive, but once again he's too late, as Aghanim has already started the ritual and has sent Zelda to the Dark World. Link tries to defeat Aghanim, but somewhat inevitably gets sent to what Sahasrahla informs him was once a sacred realm. The Elder tells him that the place has been brought to ruin and corrupted thanks to a wish made by Ganon, and then asks him to free the 7 maidens used in Aghanim's ritual.
Now this is where one of my few nitpicks with this game comes in. I'm not the biggest fan of how linear this section of the game is. Maybe I'm a little spoiled by more recent Zeldas, but I would have preferred if you could take on the dungeons in any order you choose, as opposed to the literal numbered order that this game decides to go with during the Dark World portion of this game. Of course, this doesn't bog down the game for me in any way. I mean, it's just more of a small gripe if anything, but it's not that big a deal in the grand scheme of things, considering all of the things this game does so right.
After besting these tough dungeons and freeing all of the maidens, Link finds himself at Ganon's tower, and with the help of said maidens breaks the seal to the entrance and finds himself face to face with Aghanim once more. This time, Aghanim goes down for real, only for Ganon to materialise out of his corpse and then fly off to the Pyramid of Power. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised old Piggy here was behind it all. We're literally in Ganon's tower. But anyway, Link darts off to the pyramid to face the Demon King, and with the power of the Master Sword and the Silver Arrows, manages to vanquish him, freeing both Hyrule and the Dark World of his evil.
So that's A Link to the Past. If you ask me, it's an all-time classic in every sense of the word. A real cutting-edge take, I know. But hey, it's a boring take because it's true. This game is near perfect. Now, will this game blow your mind in today's day and age? Probably not. If anything, there might be some small annoyances that ruin things for you.
Some that immediately come to mind are the acquisition of certain items like the aforementioned Silver Arrows. Unless you're a thorough explorer and talk to every NPC you meet, a lot of the time you'd have no way of knowing. You need something like a book to read a stone tablet, or in the case of the Silver Arrows, some random item upgrade that's mandatory to beat the final boss. As mentioned before, Zelda 3 is a lot less cryptic than its predecessors, but with that being said, it's not completely free of all that stuff, but neither is the rest of the series, so I can't hold it against the game too much. As for personal gripes I have with the game, I will say despite being a fan of how the game looks in general, I sometimes find the colour palettes used to be a little washed out and odd looking. From what I understand, this was commonplace at the time with most NES games looking this way, but I would have preferred a brighter range of colours. Although saying that, the almost grimy looking palette works great in the Dark World. It really helps bring to life the corruption and evil the place is consumed by. I know the alternate world / dimension trope has been done to death since, but A Link to the Past was one of the first to do it, and did a great job if you ask me. The Dark World actually feels like a threatening place, with so many stronger enemies and tougher challenges to face than Hyrule itself. Also, the Dark World theme is honestly unbelievable. It's probably one of my all-time favourite video game songs. That being said, outside of the main handful of standout tracks that have rightfully gone down in history as some of the greatest video game songs ever, the OST is pretty forgettable. And part of that is because most of the other tracks are cave or dungeon themes that sound pretty similar. They're still very well made tracks, but during gameplay they don't really jump out of the play as much as the iconic tracks of the bunch.
Now that's pretty much all I have to say about the game itself, but now there's a matter of which version you should play. Most people tend to talk about the Super Nintendo original. Hell, that's a version I'm playing for this very review, thanks to the Nintendo Switch Online service. But that's not the only version of the game, as there was a remake / port of sorts for the Game Boy Advance with some added content.
In terms of base game, it's essentially a one-to-one remake and is super faithful to the original, save for an extra dungeon and a couple new items exclusive to this version. If you ask me, it's an equally valid way to experience A Link to the Past. While maybe not the most accessible way these days, if for whatever reason it's the only way you can experience the game, go for it. It's definitely worth it. It was the way I initially experienced the game a couple of years ago and I don't have any real criticisms for it. However, a vocal minority online would have you believe the whole game is ruined by the fact Link now yells and grunts, which makes absolutely no sense to me. Link making noises didn't stop people from enjoying Ocarina of Time. Or any game after Ocarina of Time for that matter, so I don't see why it's an issue here. If you want my advice, ignore those complaints and track down this version if it seems more appealing to you. Also, I won't be getting into it in this video because I don't have any real way to experience it yet, but this version also comes with a side game called Four Swords. From what I hear, it's a short yet fun time, but as I just said, I can't experience it because, well, it requires at least 2 players, and unless there's another way I can experience it, like via emulator, or I can just convince a friend to come over with their copy of the game and try beating one sitting, there's almost no way I can play it, at least for now.
That being said, if you guys have any way I could play Four Swords, either single player or otherwise, I'd love to hear it in the comments because I'd love to do a mini review of it sometime. Now if you ask me which version you should play, I'd say either's fine. But the SNES original is a lot more readily available these days, both through legitimate means like NSO, as well as other not so legitimate means. Either way, I'd say this game holds up very well. As I mentioned before, it's probably not going to blow your mind in today's day and age, but it's still a must play. It's one of those games that set the foundation for modern gaming, and is arguably the true beginning of the Zelda franchise.